Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Mat Chat, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Really, really happy to be joined by my good friend, someone who has worn the USA Wrestling gear on many occasions as a international coach and the assistant coach at Arizona State, my good friend Lee Pritts. Happy New Year, brother. How are you?
Meerkat, thanks for having me on, man. How you doing?
It's been 25 days since we saw each other in person, so we had to get you on the air, right? Yeah. So you came
it's
down.
Only been that short?
Well, today's the 18th, and that was the 22nd, so something like that, give or take a day.
That felt like 3 months ago.
Yeah. Well, we've both been running and ripping. So those were some good matches, though, man. That tournament turned out really good.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I ended up getting down there to it, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. There's some good dual meets, and I don't get to see many dual meets, right? So
yeah,
it was good to get down and see that format and see those guys scrap like that.
I realize how rude I'm being. For those of you watching or listening, we're talking about the Hall of Fame Dual Meet Classic that they put on down there in the Gallagher Iba Arena, and 16 really good teams, and ended up with Edmond North wrestling Stillwater and winning in the last match by heavyweight down 4. And for somebody who's a tournament director, you can't script it any better than it comes down to heavyweight. So nobody got hurt. Everybody had a great time. So, it was a good start for us. So
maybe a few feelings. You said nobody got hurt, but maybe a few feelings did.
I would certainly expect, right? Like 15 teams had to have their feelings hurt, and certainly multiple individuals, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a good experience, though. So it's
great.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I'm going to jump around with you a little bit. Let's start with Arizona State. So You guys have had a really interesting dual meet season. You beat Mizzou, and that was a big one. In that you guys had to win all the coin flips. You and I had actually talked ahead of time, and then the matches where you were, I'll say this, we'll just put this, where you were underdogs, not get pinned. And then that worked out. And then you've had some other duels where you've been less than full strength, which I think are teams that really aren't as good as Missouri in a dual meet. And you've lost to those teams. I mean, Iowa State's really good, but I feel like Missouri's probably better than Princeton in a dual meet. I mean, I'm sure Joe D and those guys and Ayers would argue that. But in terms of rankings, let's just put it this way. If they went by rankings, then the seats held, and Princeton doesn't match up great against Mizzou because of Keegan and Quincy, that's going to be a toss-up. So tell me a little bit about how you and Zeke and the rest of the crew have kind of looked at the dual meet season so far, and maybe just even sprinkle in there what's it like doing that without Teamer this year.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a challenge, right? It's been a challenge. It's been a challenge, and it's not just us. There's every team's dealing with it. So I don't think we get caught up so much in, hey, we're down a guy, or we're down 2 guys or 3 guys, or whatever it is. And for whatever reason it is, whether it's Colton Schultz being at a training camp, or, someone's sick, or, hey, we're just resting a guy because it's time to rest him right now. And, this is credit to Zeke, is Zeke's not, he wants to win everything. He's one of the most competitive people I've ever been around, but he doesn't actually care about his dual meet record, and, he puts a lot of faith and trust in me with the schedule. And so as I'm starting to work on putting things together, I'm always calling him like, hey, man, we're about to go through this gauntlet. Are you good with this? And this is, a year in advance, right? And he's like, absolutely.
Right.
He goes, this works great. It works great with our training cycles. And, and so he likes it. He likes it. He says it the other day is when he had Greg Jones, right? Greg Jones, I think, lost 3 things. He goes, his goal every year was to try to get Greg a loss. He goes, I need to find losses for him. So I don't, Zeke's
that was a hard task.
Extremely hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. So Zeke wants to win everything, but at the same time, he understands that, we're going to do what's right for the team at all times. And, and on the other side of that coin, is we got to do a better job of getting the guys that aren't starting, our 2s and 3s. We got to do a better job of getting them prepared, year round. We have to do a better job of elevating their level and getting them in that starter mindset to where it doesn't matter. When they have their opportunity, they're prepared and they're ready to go. And that's where I think we have to get better, and I don't know if I should put that out there, but I'm putting it out there. We have to do a better job of getting that person ready, getting that second and third guy ready, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when a Ja'Cory teamer is going to go down in a freak accident, right?
Right.
And, Ja'Cory is great. I mean, he's always great, whether it's a tournament, a dual meet, or whatever, because he's electrifying.
Right.
He loves wrestling, and he's a team guy, and he's fiery, and his celebrations are great. His wrestling, is exciting, and so anytime you have somebody of that caliber, or somebody that wrestles with that kind of fire, you're gonna miss them, whether it's a dual meet or a tournament or the season or whatever it is. So yeah, it's been a little challenging, but at the same time, it's gonna help us grow as a team, and we learned some lessons, and we're bouncing back.
Yeah, well, you guys have done a great job of consistently, being a trophy team and then a top 10 team in the years you weren't, but last 2 years, getting a trophy. And obviously I know you really well, but I think I know most coaches, and I coach, like, no matter what you get, unless it's first, you're not happy. And even if it's first, there's some kid that you really love that didn't do what he wanted to do, or on the international side, what she wanted to do, and so you're, as a coach, you're never 100% happy. And it's very difficult to explain that to coaches of other sports. Like football, if the team won, you don't really care if a guy missed a block. And if the team lost, you don't really care who caught 4 touchdowns. It's like, well, we won or we lost. And it's a different vibes. You said a couple things here that were on kind of tied right into my notes. So one thing you said about, you said sometimes it's just time to rest guys. Okay. So I think one of the complaints that fans have is that there's all these matchups that get projected. Like there's 3 or 4 huge duels coming up this weekend, and they're huge duels because, like, number 1's supposed to wrestle number 3, and number 2 is supposed to wrestle number 4. And we've seen more and more over the last couple of years these matches not happen. We see this at the qualifying tournaments a lot. Like I lose in the semis and I just default out, and then it doesn't cost me a seat at nationals. And it's tied to something else you said, which is you guys don't really care about your dual meet record. And I didn't care either. Like, we're in JUCO, I could care less if we wrestled the dual meet. I just want to wrestle 10 tournaments, and then they can figure out the seedings at the regionals, because if my guys are ready to wrestle 2-day tournaments, then we're going to be fine. Yeah. To grow the sport, there's this whole goofy thing where, like, we're duels. We scored wrestling all these different ways. So let's just start with, everyone's going to coach to the rules, right? So if you only need X amount of matches to get an RPI and all that stuff, you're not going to put them through any more than you need to. How would you fix wrestling so that more people are wrestling more often? Is it change to one semester? Is it spread it out? Is it all duels? Is it all tournaments? Like, what would you suggest?
I don't think it's broke now. I think we have fans that probably aren't happy, but I don't think it's broke. Look at our NCAA tournament, right? What are we, number 2 or number 3 for
no, the tournament's amazing. Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. So it's not broke, and people talk about, oh, it's a long season. It can be a long season. For some people, it's a short season, but it's, there's a lot of wrestling goes in, and, you look at teams from year to year, and I know a couple years ago, Lehigh had a great team, and they ended up with a bunch of injuries and illness and all sorts of things that kept their guys out, and it's like, so, and then all of a sudden maybe they'll get beat up on the internet, or, who was it last year? Maybe I think, was it Iowa? Did Iowa get a bunch of injuries last year, and they were getting beat up, because they weren't.
They were injured, but it's because all their guys were 27 years old, because they had a bunch of 7-year seniors. Like, basically Kemmer and Ironman, those kind of guys, Marinelli, these guys have been around forever. And wrestling, that's a whole nother conversation, whether you should be wrestling that many years in college, right?
No, and I get it. So the fans want to see these, and we do too. And I'm pretty sure, we're probably getting beat up now because we have lost so many. But listen, we want those matches to happen too. Our guys want those matches, and their opponents want those matches. But sometimes, it just doesn't make sense if they have, if they're going to go in and wrestle number 2 or number 1 or number 2 or number 3, and they just came off of sickness or they just came off an injury, and they're not prepared. What are we doing? It doesn't make sense.
So that brings up a great point. So first of all, when you said it's not broke, that's the NCAA basketball argument, that the basketball tournament makes so much money that we're good. And the financials aren't the same, but it's a profitable tournament. I mean, I'm actually a business guy and talk to people about that. But where it's sort of broke is, so if the regular season meant more, okay, like let's say that you have to win, you have to be ranked in the top 24 in duels to make the national tournament. And then where you're ranked is going to be your seed. So like dropping a duel to Princeton literally means nothing to you guys. Like your goal is to place, win the national tournament. And whether you beat or lose Princeton, besides the lessons you learn from that, are irrelevant. If you take 17th, people aren't going to care. And if you take first, no one's going to care. So I guess maybe a better question is, how do we make the regular season matter more?
Well, I think it matters, right? I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth real quick, Dave, because
that's you, baby. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. So, like I said, it's not broke. The NCAA tournament is an important, right? And so the NCAA tournament is technically an individual sport to a degree. Each individual is trying to accomplish their goals.
Right.
But I also think we're the ultimate team sport.
Sure.
Right. I think we're the ultimate team sport because you're out there and you're wrestling for yourself, but you're wrestling for the name on your singlet. You're scoring points for the name on your singlet. And the guys are fighting for each other there. And I know that's why our team, has won team trophies the last 2 years, because the guys were fighting for each other.
Right.
All right. And, so if you go back to the dual meets, man, our guys want to be in there. They're devastated right now. They're hurting right now. They don't like to lose. It hurts. So, all of a sudden we had to go back in and fix these problems, and so it's individuals are all trying to fix, whatever the reason they're not in the lineup, whatever the reason so-and-so got sick, or, the training camp didn't line up properly for, with Colton, or whatever it is. Everyone's trying to fix it. So, hey, we don't like losing. Nobody likes losing. And so no one's pointing fingers. We're all taking ownership on how can we get better at this, So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I give you an answer. I just, like I said, I don't think things are broke right now. And I don't know that the season doesn't matter, because every match you wrestle counts some way, shape, or form to getting you to the NCAA tournament.
It does, but I think, to be fair, I think you'd give me this. Like in the NCAA football, like right now, only 4 teams make the chance to win a national championship. So, like if you only the top 8 teams in duels could win the national championship, the Princeton duel would knock you out. Okay, like it just would. So, I mean, that's just the math of it, because there'd be too many other teams that go undefeated. You're going to be 9th at best. And so I think, and I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth because I'm in the media now, but I've sat at a lot of kitchen tables and promised a lot of moms and dads and grandmas, I'm going to do what's best for your son. And if you're a good coach, that matters more than what anybody on the internet thinks or says, because you didn't promise those people. Like, those people might be your friends, they might not be your friends, but those parents and those families matter. I feel like let me ask you this. I tried to put together a dual meet event. Our guy, Frank Pop, has tried to put together and done a good job of putting together dual meet events. They're very hard to make money. Teams only want to wrestle certain teams. A lot of it's understandable. Like, I'll just say this, so we won't name them. If you take the top 2 teams in the country and they already wrestle each other, they don't want to wrestle somewhere else because it takes the juice away from that. And if they alternate hosting it, those are huge economic points. I went to your duel with Penn State where you guys stopped their winning streak, and I was sitting there with my friends, and it was the last match, and I go, if this guy gets pinned, you're going to hear a church mouse. And if he doesn't get pinned, sit still, because you're going to get trampled. And I mean, that was an amazing thing to be a part of, just not a part of it, but attend it.
Yeah.
I mean, it had zero to do with anything, but it was cool to be there. But so it's complicated, but like, do you think if we could figure out a way to get a dual meet championship done where people could do the economics, do you think as a coach, you guys, like say it was 2 weeks after nationals, they took the top 16 teams from nationals, put them in a bracket and wrestled it out. And there was money for the teams, whether it's scholarship money or NAL money. What do you think?
No, they used to do, and I thought it was a really cool event. And I'm not the expert on why it got messed up and how, but they used to do all divisions. You guys were there. They used to do all divisions.
Yeah,
I know, and we did too. They did, D1, D2, D3, NAIA, women's, JUCO,
club, all of it,
and club, all in the same arena.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was awesome.
And 140 people attended it.
Yeah. Again, that goes to show you, but the event was awesome. And I think on the internet, you could probably drive something in that. But at the same time, and I guess that originally started as Virginia Duels, right? Virginia Duels had that. And then they gave that event. And I only know that because of the Virginia Duels people or my PE. And they ended up giving that to, I guess it was NWCA, saying, yeah, take it. If you guys want the national duels, take it. If it's good for the sport, take it. And they had this great event. In some way, shape, or form, it got messed up, and we did a couple of goofy things for a few years, and people had their feelings hurt because such and such team wouldn't wrestle such and such team.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it was a great event.
People got called oranges.
Was that at that event?
That was because of that event. So, there's things that happened.
I remember that a little bit. Vaguely.
Not often. That's a subtle Sunkist reference too.
Subtle. I remember that vaguely, but I do. That's what I'm saying is and then I remember they switched like Big Ten versus every other. Like, what are we doing? Like, it got really goofy, and I'm like, man, the other event, it didn't have great attendance, but the internet wasn't the internet then, right? And so, and you didn't have the different, I guess you might have had Flow then, but you didn't have Flow and you didn't have Rockfin where people were trying to make money and turn it into revenue, right? So I don't think that was broken. I thought that was good for the sport of wrestling, So I don't know. You start going after the season, I think you start messing with freestyle.
You do, but to be fair, of the 160 kids that would be in the dual meet, there's maybe 20 of them that have any realistic chance of doing anything in freestyle. And then we see other kids that are like age group world champions that don't wrestle at all in the summer, like an Aaron Brooks or a Keegan O'Toole, or these guys that we all thought, hey, they're going to try to make a world team, and they didn't even wrestle a match. So, I mean, you're right. No matter what you do, it's going to screw something up slightly. Like if they make wrestling a second semester sport, it's either going to go right on top of the US Open or America USA Wrestling. And this is on USA Wrestling's airwaves. They're going to have to push everything back. Like it's, it's one or the other. Or like a guy like pick a Yanni, because he's the easiest example of a guy who's a current world team member, world medalist, and still in college. But those guys are the unicorns. They're the rarity. I mean?
Right. But again, if we have Colton Schultz, he's on the senior team, right? If he has an event, and it's a national duels or that event, he's probably going to that event. If it's meaningful. If it's meaningful.
Well, like Snyder was the one, I think, where everybody was seeing that, like when he was at Ohio State. And like I remember I was doing rankings for track. And just quick story, like Andy Hamilton was like, well, if a guy sits out 21 days, you got to take him out of the rankings. I'm like, well, I'm not taking Kyle Snyder out of the rankings.
Ever.
Ever, right? Like that, and what to rank Gable Stevenson in the first rankings were probably two of the more difficult conversations.
Right.
I go, he's either 33rd or he's 5th or he's first, because like he had beaten Tanner Hall. And, I'm like, okay, well, we can justify putting him here. He's probably the best guy, or we just put him in at 33 so we don't look too dumb. But anyway, so it's whatever you tweak, it's going to obviously ruffle some feathers, and some of those feathers are deservedly so. Not like, hey, people are being crybabies. Like there's genuine concerns, and obviously USA Wrestling, they're the ones putting us on the airwaves. So it would be interesting if they pushed it back, like how that would all work. I mean, there's obviously academic concerns like, hey, if you give a kid a whole semester to get ready, maybe that's better. You deal with that stuff more than I do. So, I mean, maybe that, maybe not making weight with Thanksgiving and Christmas in the middle of your season. I mean, again, maybe we're just getting soft as a country. There's a whole bunch of ways to look at that too, right?
Yeah, man. Like I said, I don't think it's broke. Listen, you make it one semester. Guess what? People are still going to be training all year long.
Right.
It's not going to change. It's not going to change. People, so we're not going to start till January. Does that mean August to December they're going to be chilling out? No.
They're all hanging out playing Frisbee in the quad.
Yeah, right. Like, that's not happening.
Right.
People are still going to be training. And so it might be worse. It might be worse.
There's an argument that you're putting taking more tread off the tires.
Yeah,
actually going longer. Yeah,
I didn't think about it till right now when I just said that. August to December, I'm like, oh god, that might be worse. There's no competition phase,
right?
But again, it's who knows? I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with it now. And again, I'm a big proponent of USA Wrestling, so I think that if we start, and look, we're doing great as a country right now.
It's the golden age, along with like the 92, 96 team, and it's different too because now we have women, right?
Right.
So like our Greco team isn't as good as it was then, but our women's team, and you obviously probably have the best women's RTC in the country. When you talk about quantity and quality, depth and high level people, how many world team members, how many world medalists, all that stuff.
Right. And that's what I mean. So it's things are going good right now, and I'm not in position to change anything, right? The last time I looked outside my door, it said assistant coach. So I stay in the trenches, I stay in the trenches.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it there, and that's where I like to be. So like I said, I'm not a decision maker and I can have opinions on it. But right now, I just think things are going good for the sport of wrestling.
Yeah. And I see that. I also see like when things are going good, the easiest thing is don't change anything, but sometimes that's how you get caught. And, so like, I mean, there's two sides of it. Like, it's very interesting since I switched this side of this. And let me say this, I think the hardest thing to do in wrestling is win matches. I think the second hardest thing to do is coach people to win matches. And I think everything else like refereeing and podcast and play-by-plays and running events and all this other stuff, I think is a distant third. Okay. So I know exactly where my lane is. I did 1, I did 2, I'm doing 3, and I know which ones were the hardest.
Right.
So like you can do, like I'm going to do a play-by-play Friday night, and it'll probably be awesome because it really doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong unless I say something blatantly stupid. It's not going to screw anything up.
Right.
Wrestling, make a mistake, you lose. If you coach and yell the wrong thing, you're hurting somebody's dream. So it's super different for sure.
Right.
So you talk about this all the time. I've never really asked you the specifics of it, and I don't want you to give away the secret sauce, but whatever. When you talk about training cycles and you talk about, I guess, rest cycles, for lack of a better word, are these specific, like, are these things you've learned from USA Wrestling throughout your years of coaching? Are they like, hey, 10 days on, 4 days off? Like, we have a ton of high school coaches that watch this stuff, and it's like, peaking people. Like, what are you allowed to share that would help us all be better?
Oh, I think it comes really from Zeke Jones, right? And Zeke was national team coach for what, 8 years, 7, 8 years, and I think this is where his brain works so good, and why he's so good, as a head coach is. Dealing national team coach, he had to deal with a lot of big personalities, right? He had Brands and he had Sanderson, he had Smith, and that we can go around all of them, and all great wrestling minds, and that's great. But then there's other sides of this sport, and that's what he would do. He's like, hey, I'm not a sports physiologist, so I'm going to go get an expert in that area. And we may have to translate what they're saying back into wrestling, but I'm going through them because they're the experts. They study this. And then, I'm not a doctor or a trainer, so when it comes to medical, I'm going to refer to them.
Right.
And, we think we know a little bit. As wrestling coaches, it's funny because we know just enough about everything to be dangerous, because in so many spots we have to do it all on our own, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember, even when I had some medical things, I felt way better when Zeke was around. I was like, Zeke, I'm going down, and he came around like Dr. Zeke's here. You know, I'm like, that's probably the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
He's a wrestling coach. He probably put some ice on it, and I was dying.
Rub it in the dirt.
Yeah. But my point is, he would go to all the areas of expertise. He's like, we know a little bit about nutrition, but he's going to go to the dietitian and make sure, like, hey, this is our time frames, and you map it all out. And so when we started working on our training cycles and how we're doing, we were all, I don't want to say guessing, right? But we were kind of guessing. You kind of know, oh, this is how you peak people. We all know peaking is basically recovering, but there's different ways to do it. It's recovering. It's how do you get them to generate the power you need them to generate at the right times and things like that. And so then we went through some different areas with, and within big round table meetings and trying to figure out, what works, what doesn't work, and what works scientifically. And it took us a couple years to dial it in, and we feel like we have a pretty good grasp of it. And we're still learning. I mean, we're still learning, but I think it comes from Zeke and the way his vision is on how to bring the experts in.
Is it, again, so I don't want to get too specific, but is it basically like, I'll use a ridiculous example. Like Randy Couture told me one time, like he was at the Greco World Championships, and like 2 days before the meet, like the U.S. team is like full, 40-minute matches kind of thing. They didn't know anything back then. And the Russian team's over there playing like dodgeball, and, I mean, like just a perfect example. And it's from Randy. So no one would tell him they were stupid because it's Randy. It was a long time ago, but yeah, facts. Right. So, but that's like the opposite example that almost everybody knows now. Like you don't do that, but like, right. It's, like I remember like you want guys almost being hungry, like to get on the mat, like to want to scrap so bad. So there's obviously different parts to it, right? Like you're saying, like nutrition, like stretching, like the mentality of it, but is it basically certain days on, certain days off, and then those days that are on? Go ahead.
Yeah. But, and we have a place out here called Neuroforce One.
Okay.
And they work with a lot of our RTC athletes. And I remember the first time I was introduced to him was Henry Cejudo, is when he beat Johnson,
Demetrius.
Mighty Mouse.
Yeah.
Demetrius Johnson. Yep. And, the time before he got beat up.
Got woodshedded. Yeah.
And this next time, he went out there, and it was funny because when he came back, I was talking to Angel Cejudo, who has a great mind too. And Angel was like, man, he's been working with Neuroforce for this training cycle because I thought he was going to get killed. Like, you thought your brother was going to get killed? He goes, yeah, I thought he was dead. He goes, he did less than he's ever done in his whole life.
Really?
Really? And I go, I need to learn more. And so what they did is they have, I don't know, this watch, or you can wear it on your ankle, some different technology. And they're like, oh, you're overtrained today. You're not working out today. And he's like, but I feel great today. Nope, not today. And like at one point there was 2 days or 3 days in a row where they're like, no, you're still on red. Your workout today is not beneficial. And so, I mean, there's people taking it to these levels, and, and all of a sudden he's performing at these, with brilliant, right? He's performing brilliant and doing less than he ever has, more efficiently.
So how does that work with keeping guys' weights down? Because like I could see it in a non-weigh-in sport, right? Like if it's football or baseball, like, hey, or like hitting golf balls, right? Like, okay, at a certain point, there's diminishing returns. Like you're tired, you're forming bad habits or whatever the case, your hands are bleeding, whatever the case may be. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, how can you do that with weight management?
I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the dietitian and your nutrition and, putting in what you need and not what you want.
That's a good way to put it.
That
covers a lot of things in life, right? Yeah.
Right. But putting in what you need when you need it. And again, I don't think as a high school coach, even college teams, we can't utilize something like that. We don't have, there's a team around these guys that are shifting with him for whatever 8, 10, 12 weeks. You know more about the fight game than I do, but I know it's 8 to 12 weeks basically.
To jump in real quick, that's an interesting parallel, right? Because I always tell people in fighting, like fighting is so much about really knowing how to beat your opponent, right? Like I'm going to fight Lee Pritts. And so he's a this leg lead and he likes to fight long, or he's a jab guy. And, you know, when you go to a tournament, like I know how much work you guys do for like NCAAs, but like at the end of the day, your guy wins first round, you have 1 and 2 choice. The next round was 1 of 4, then 1 of 8. So like at a certain point, like even if you stay up for film all night, it's like, look, we just do what we do and just be aware, like this guy likes, like if you're wrestling Tanner Cook, like let's avoid the cement job, you know, like those kind of things. You know? But it's not like I'm going to spend this many hours breaking down. Like when you're coaching Anthony Valencia, like we're not just going to break down Shane Griffith to the 14th degree, you know, because it's a tournament. The fighting isn't that way. So yeah, very different, right?
But I think it's more than that. It's besides just the technical side of it. I think they're doing more nutritionally, you know, as they come out, okay, on this day you get massage, this day hyperbaric chamber, this day you're eating this, you're backing this up, okay, and all of a sudden they just shut down your workouts for 3 days, and because of how detailed I know that they are around here, you know, at Fight Ready is, I know that they're going, okay, if they're shutting down for 3 days, this is your nutritional needs for these days.
So you have to eat less. You drink more water.
I'm guessing. Yeah. I know that there's adjustments with, if one adjusts, the others have to adjust accordingly. You know, just listen to them talk, you know.
So the simplest of terms, and I might be wrong, like if you're burning less calories, you're probably going to bring in less calories.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm assuming that, but you know, and again, I haven't sat in on these fight games, but listening to those guys talk and listening to some of the people that we have around here that are at Fight Ready, and they have, I don't know, they're like 15-0 in championship fights or something.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's hands-on all day, every day. And, you know, obviously we don't have that luxury, but, you know, we have 4 coaches coaching 35 guys. And
no, the ratio is interesting, right? Like you're saying, there's 1 per 9, and over there it's like 3 for 1 the other way.
Right. And
4
so
for 1 the other way.
We have our dietitian come in and educate them. We have our massage therapist. We have everyone helping out, you know, but again, and I know we got off on a tangent going back to training cycles, but yeah, you know, we're basically on the national team schedule, right? And it's, you basically 2 days on Monday, 2 days, you know, 2 workouts on Tuesday, you know, maybe a sports game on Wednesday, 2 on Thursday, 2 on Friday, Saturday, something light, Sunday off, you know, and obviously that changes when you're in competition a little, but at the end of the day, all your, I'm assuming most of your teams are doing 9 to 11 workouts a week, and it's what you're doing in those workouts is where I think the magic happens.
So that's why you're the best guest, because the segue is perfect. So when you're doing these one-on-ones, okay, it's like that's one of the big differences, I think, like between D1 and like JUCO. Like I would spend a lot of time at night watching film with guys, but I was rotating like 4 guys a week through my house, and you know, we just didn't have a real job, you know, like, you know, I couldn't just be at the school all day. No, I mean, like, it's a real, we talked about it. Like, he's like, how do we shortcut this and try to make it as efficient as possible? But like, okay, so I've seen you work out with McGee, okay, like in the off season. I was lucky enough just to watch, and it was really a joy because my dad was with me, and, you know, he obviously is friends with you, and he just kind of watched you guys go for like an hour. And then afterwards, like he was asking me, like, what do you think? I'm like, why don't you just ask Lee? He was the one doing it. We're going out to lunch, you know, but like, how much of it is proactive versus reactive? And what I mean by that is this. So how much of it is you saying, I think McGee needs to work on X, and McGee can be any person in the world, Courtney or whoever, just fill in the blank, versus let's take what he just did in a match, okay, and then work on emphasizing what he did well, and then sort of filling in the gaps on what he didn't do well. And maybe it just maybe he just didn't do something well he always does well and just literally forgot, or hey, we kind of found a hole in the game here, we need to spend some time on it.
Well, I'll give you a quick story and then I'll go back and answer that. Today, when I was doing an individual with McGee, he did something I've never seen him to do before. And it was nice. I said, I jumped. I said, McGee, what was that? He goes, I did it last week too. I said, listen, that was really good. I said, you had that in high school or something, because that's well developed. He's like, yeah. I used to do it in high school. I'm like, where has it been? He's like, man, I got to stay in my lane. I said, well, I'll stay in your lane, but can we start sprinkling some of those things you did? And I said, you don't have to do those all the time, but I said, I like where your mind is. You want to stay with what's working and cutting the mat off and hard sets and getting to your hard attacks and finish. I said, man, can you just sprinkle a few of those in? He started laughing. So every time I see him now today, an hour later, I see him, I'm like,
yeah.
You know? Yeah. But it's fun, and it's funny. So I think it's all of our staff. And again, our staff communicates well. So it might be something Zeke sees, or Frank, or Eric, or even guys on the team. Parko might come over and say something, or Courtney and Figs work out a lot with him, or Clebo. There's a good room right there, and they might come over and say something like, man, in the room, he's doing this and this, but when he goes out there, he always gets a little lost in this area. We got to fix that. And so it's not us being the experts. It's all of us collaborating to saying, hey, we can grow in this area, or man, this is a major weakness right now that we have to fix. And again, McGee might be like, I don't think it is. Well, okay, we're not going to fight that battle. Unless he's getting beat, he don't think it's a major weakness. We're going on to somewhere where he thinks he can grow as well. So I think for us, it's more of a collaboration than a coach athlete.
Well, you said this to me, and Kendall Cross said this to me on air one time. He said, I think he said this, because I think coaches spend sometimes too much time working on what guys aren't good at, and they stop being good at what they are good at. And he goes, and his was the perfect example. He goes, like, I was never going to be an upper body, not like, he goes, like a hard hand fight, snappy guy. I was never going to get good enough to beat Terry Brands. He goes, I had to be where I was good and make Terry Brands wrestle me where I was good. And I think, like, I talk to my buddies that are coaches that watch and listen, because, like, I get to talk to you guys. I get to talk to you on the air, but I could also, there's a bunch of you guys I'm lucky enough, if I called and ask a question, you guys would answer the phone or call me back in the next day or two.
And you're on my speed dial.
Is it P for Panda? So
you're on my favorites.
I love it. So it's a blessing, but I think that's a lesson that I think sometimes two coaches want to coach too much. Like, I coach two guys in jiu-jitsu, and I'm always, you're always like, I want to teach them, I want to help them. But I've gotten better just like putting guys in scenarios, and I'm like, figure it out. And like, let them go for a while and figure it out. Because when you learn it yourself versus somebody telling you, it sticks longer. I mean, that's been proven. You talked about study and science and all this stuff. So how much do you guys try to consciously balance out? Like, let's say I wrestle and I had a bad match. You probably don't need me to tell you I wrestle bad if I'm a competitive guy. Like, hey, David tried hard, or he just wrestled poorly, or cut his weight poorly, or whatever, had a fight with his girlfriend, whatever. And then say, look, but you did do these things well, and you just got to get back to this good stuff. How much of that is a part of that conversation?
Oh, it's huge. And I don't think it's more, if someone comes, hey, coach, I wrestled really bad. I'm like, yeah.
We all saw it.
Yeah. Well, Kayla, I know I use Kayla Miracle. Her, first match back from injury was in Final X.
Right.
So she can't walk, and then all of a sudden, 3 months later, she's wrestling in Final. She went from not walking to competing in Final X.
That's the special Jennifer Page 2 out of 3, just so if people are caught up. Go ahead.
And she got smashed in her first match.
Yes.
And she's got, her eyes are this big, and we're walking down the hallway, and she kind of runs down the hallway, and she's like, no, and so I get down there, and she's like, I don't know what happened out there. The only thing I could think about was my knee. And I was like, whew. She's like, what? I'm like, thank God, because that's what it looked like. And
awesome.
It's kind of a joke, but it was like,
no, you were kind enough to actually tell me this like that later that afternoon. But please, because this is an awesome story. Go ahead.
And I was like, yeah, we've tugged on that knee, we've twisted it, we pulled it, we've done everything you can do to that knee. And I said, and not to mention, Jen just tried to keep that leg. She grabbed that thing and tried to rip it off 4 or 5 times. And not to be mean or nasty, she was wrestling hard. I said, and she tried to take it home with her. I said, so that thing's as battle tested. Go wrestle. And she came out and wrestled great afterwards, So, and we didn't have time to make big adjustments technically and all that.
So the funny thing is, just so people know at home that I'm not that smart, I call Pritts. I go, what adjustments did you guys make? He goes, I told her knee was fine. And then you told me but sometimes simplest thing, it's sometimes it's just, and those kids are so good. They got to believe in themselves, right?
Yeah, but it is, you do fix things technically, obviously, but they have stuff that they want to fix technically. It's like, I wrestled bad. Well, we all know you wrestled bad. Why? Let's get to the why. And once we get to the why, then we can actually start fixing things. As Zeke and our staff calls it deep learning, right? Let's do some deep learning. Don't come off, I wrestled bad. That's terrible. I'm better than that. Stop. What are we talking about? Those are coach answers. Let's get down to the nitty gritty on what happened here. What happened over the last 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, hour of, little things. You're used to starting at 125 and now all of a sudden it's 165 and you're the first guy up and you ate the same amount that you ate if you were the 6th match up, and wrestling an hour and a half later. That's a problem. Or 2.5 hours later, really on a 1 hour wait, right?
Yeah,
that's a problem. That's a problem. Those are things that you have to learn, but you don't know until usually you get stung by it.
Sometimes you got to touch the stove, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to see how hot it is yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great example, like you said, about, because you guys have had a bunch of duels that have started at 57, and ended at 49, based on certain matchups, which, it was funny because like I saw Kyvan post a picture of you guys, and I know the great relationship you had with Willie. Willie and I think became friends through you and my father. And me and Kyvan have our own relationship, but I was texting Kyvan while he's doing the play-by-play. I go, don't be surprised if this duel goes 5-5. Like I go, and where you guys started it, you better bonus first, and he's like, it's not going 5-5. And then like when it went 5-5, he sent me a text and just said, touche. I'm like, us old guys know a couple things,
Yeah. I wasn't. Dresser was smooth with the coin toss. I knew what he was doing. Like this dude. And he was so smooth. He did it smooth. We were back there. He might add a weighted coin, but we were back there. Kidding, Dresser. I don't want you to hurt your feelings. And him and I are close. We have a good relationship. But he after we flipped the coin and he won, he was like, oh, wow, let me think about, why don't we?
Yeah, like you hadn't thought about it ahead of time.
Yeah, like it was. Yeah, why don't we start at? Why don't we start at 65? I'm like, okay. Like he didn't have that plan. They did it the night before too, just getting ready for us, starting the duel there.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. It's probably for another conversation. Like, do you want to run out to the lead and hang on, or do you want to know you're going to be behind and try to run them down? There's interesting psychology on both of that. But I want to spend a few minutes on Sunkist.
Yeah.
So obviously the club's having huge success, and it's a fascinating thing because I don't know how many people are watching this for the first time or whatever, but I believe you were my first guest, and you helped me probably get the hardest guest to get. And probably for the first 10 minutes, the worst interview I ever did, because I just asked a series of yes/no questions like I was a deer in headlight, but got to talk to Art Martori, which is literally like Muhammad in the mountain. Like the guy, everybody great in wrestling looks up to Art Martori. That's probably the best way to say it. And so you've got Art Martori at the head of Sunkist Kids. You obviously have all these guys with international experience. And then you've got a guy like Mark Perry, who seems to have I've had him on before. I've known Mark forever, but has this great relationship with not only, the guys on your team, but the girls. I mean, they basically all left Iowa to come with him. And you guys have added people since then. And like a Dom Parrish being a world champion and isn't the best person in the room is a testament to that. And then the Suriano thing and the very first mat chat we did on USA Wrestling, again, thanks to you, is Suriano, Zahid, and Mark, which was like, I remember like, I need a banger coming out of the gate, and you helped me do that. So you've been around Suriano. I think Flo calls him like the international man of mystery. I mean, he's certainly an interesting cat when you talk to him in small chunks, right? Like all us, we don't know him, right? So it's like, I give Suriano credit because he's not Derek Jeter. He's not Tom Brady, like where he can talk for 5 minutes and literally say nothing. Like he said something. No, I mean, those guys are like, I don't even need to waste the 5 minutes. Like, when you do what I do, you're like, well, why am I talking to that person?
Yeah.
He's a very interesting dude, has won obviously at every level. So let's just start with, what is it like having him back in the room? Like, I assume that has to help like the Figs and the Courtneys and the McGees of the world, right? I mean, there's got to be crossover there, right?
Yeah, there is a little bit, right? And he's been back, I don't know, maybe a month.
Okay.
And I'll tell you something that's really, I don't know if it's unique, but it's something that I know is our college team spends a lot of time servicing the RTC, where I know a lot of places this RTC kind of services the college. And for us, it's our college guys spend a lot of time over there helping them out. So we rotate them, right? So we rotate them so it's not just, okay, one guy. Courtney, you're going over with Suriano all week. It's not that. He might go Courtney one day, Figaro another day, Klebo another day, McGee another day, sprinkling, and again, we got guys. So, but then when they go over there, they're both working on the skill sets that's being taught that day, right? So it's growth for both of them. Yeah, it's growth for both of them. And I haven't spent an enormous amount of time with Suriano, right? He's, him and Perry, they have the relationship. They're the ones doing it. But I can tell you there's very few focused like that guy. That guy and when it comes to discipline, I don't know that I've seen anyone with greater discipline.
Tell me what you mean by that, because you've coached a ton of guys at every level. I mean, you've coached age group world champions. You've been on national teams. So what do you mean by that? Just
in a 24-hour period, with how much discipline he has in life, what goes in his mouth, what his recovery looks like, what he's, whether he's going to meet with, a masseuse, or he's doing the next new wave, the Reiki lady, or, the next, I call them voodoo doctors. He likes all the voodoo doctors. We have a lot of people that do, but Sager, I'm sorry if you're listening, because Sager likes all the voodoo doc. He's one of our executive board members. And
Sager bought me lunch in Omaha, so shout out to Sager. Shout out to Sager. He bought Ron and Jan and David lunch, so shout out to Sager.
That's right. So he gets mad at me when I call them voodoo doctors, but they're not the normal doctors. They're natural, non-traditional doctors. So these guys, a lot of our people love them, and they go to do these different methods. But he's, he'll stand barefoot and look at the sun maybe for 15 minutes because of, what's going to happen, how he feels about, and I'm just telling you, he does some very unique things, and he's 100% disciplined and bought into everything that he's doing for a 24-hour period, whether it's how he sleeps, what time he goes to sleep, when he wakes up. And again, I don't spend an enormous amount of time. It's from being around and just talking to Perry, talking to him a little bit, talking to the people around. It's just, I know for a fact every day in that 24-hour, I don't know how many minutes are not calculated. Yeah, that's interesting. And another different way of discipline that I heard. And like, I'm trying really hard to surround myself with like these things, like how to think great. Like every day I'm trying to post something positive, mindset stuff, whatever the case may be. But like, and part of it is people have been asking why I'm posting. I'm like, well, if I post it, I have to try to live my life that way, or else I'm a complete hypocrite. And we could have a whole conversation about having feet in good and the bad parts of the world. But, I talked to a guy who was an assistant coach, and he was talking about Jordan Oliver.
And I said, what makes Oliver so good? And this was back when he was in college. And, he goes, he has the unique ability to work on one skill set for probably the longest period of time I've ever seen without getting distracted. And, you go to a camp. I mean, you teach camps. You and I had a lot of very cool conversations about camp philosophy now, right? And we all sort of have this thing, Michael, if Lee Pritts showed 7 moves, then I got to show 9. And I got to show that 2 of mine are better than his, it becomes sort of an ego thing, right? And where, at the end of the day, if you're really, really good at 6 things, so good that even if they know, hey, Lee or David do these 6 things, yeah, good luck, stop it. I think Jordan Oliver, Kyle Snyder with the ankles, David Taylor, those guys, it's interesting to me that all these different sort of forms of discipline, but it's all involved with locking in. I've been reading a lot about the difference between discipline and motivation, and it's fascinating. Go ahead.
I don't know the assistant coach that told you that about Oliver, but I can second that. I've seen him do stance motion and not even stance motion, but focusing on keeping his knee over his toe and being able to move efficiently for long periods of time. Where I'm just where he'd even ask me to come in. Hey, can you come in and watch me do? I'm like, I got to go in and watch him keep his knee over his toe for 2 hours. And I was sitting there oh, that looks beautiful. That's awesome. And I see all the other stuff that he does that's so magical, right? He has so many magical things that he can do. And he's hyper focused on that position and being able to be ready to fire and be ready to get his foot back if need be, or change directions on you and being able to wrestle there efficiently. And I mean, I've seen him, I watched him do that for ridiculous amounts of time. So, yeah, I agree. That's an insane form of discipline,
And it's probably a really good way to kind of end this because, you mentioned at the front end, hey, people got nutritionists and they got physiologists and we got a training table and, we got sports doctors, all these things. And a lot of the high school coaches that I talk to are kids club coaches. They're they don't have all that stuff, it's lower middle income. It's your normal stuff. It's three wrestling dads and a coach trying to coach 80 kids. And so well, it could be interpreted as discouraging. Well, hey, we don't have all this stuff, and somebody else does, so we're going to lose. But what we can do? We can concentrate. We can make sure we put our knee over our toe longer than the other person, and we know how to win that position every time. And as soon as we shake hands, we're in that position.
Right.
So these are, I coach a jiu-jitsu guy, and he never really won anything big. I told him, I go, if you do this one tie-up, you'll place at the Worlds. I said, but you have to do it 3,000 times, and we had 6 weeks. And he did, and he fought probably the sloppiest fight of his life, but he won that fight because he was in that position the whole time. Yeah. And so it's just discipline's an amazing thing when you think about it.
2 things, and I was going to say it earlier, but I'm going to circle back to it, is because you fed into it again. And I don't know if Ben Askren said it to me or if I heard him say it to somebody else, or regardless, but I know it came from Ben Askren's lips.
Okay.
And it was, if you get to your positions more than they get to theirs, you're going to win. Or you have your probability to win is much higher.
Yeah.
You got to keep getting to your positions, right? And I know he said that when he was in college. He was younger, and that was the first time. So now, and the same thing years later, I ended up going to a Bellator fight, and he was fighting Michael Chandler, Sean Bunch. God, I can't remember. There was 5, stud wrestlers on it, right? It was awesome, and it was in Albuquerque, and Ben had to fight this Russian striker, and the guy was supposed to beat him down. He was a great striker, and Ben ended up just smashing him. He might have TKO'd him, whatever, but he ended up, the numbers was something astronomical, like 253 strikes to 3.
Right.
Ben, on Ben's side.
Right. Well, because he did all those shots from the top.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah,
all
right.
of them. Took one in the chin and then got on top and just smashed, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And so afterwards, everyone's back at the hotel, and I saw the Russian coaches there. And I went over because, again, I'm going to pick their brain real quick. And I said, hey, how much time in this training camp were you able to spend wrestling to getting ready for this guy? And the guy said something, and he said, we didn't spend hardly any. I said, you're getting ready to wrestle one of the best wrestlers in MMA, and you spent zero. He goes, if we got to wrestle, we didn't have enough time. If we got to a wrestling position, we were in trouble. We had to keep it into a fight position, a striking position. And I was like, and at first when I walked away, I'm like, well, that was dumb. But then as I'm driving home, I was like, wait, that's genius. It's going back with same thing that Ben was saying. Get to your positions more than they get to theirs. And, until a million other coaches have said the same thing to me in different ways and different formats. Yeah. But it's you might work on 3 things, but you got to keep getting to those 3 things more than they can get to theirs. And you're going to win that battle.
Yeah, it's all the transition stuff, which you and I have talked about off air, about how do I get to my stuff? Like, if once I get to a left side underhook, I'm good. Well, there's 16 different ways to get there. And how do I avoid the 4 traps you're setting for me while I'm trying to get there, right? Like, that's the thing. So,
yeah.
Well, what's funny about these conversations for me is people should know we speak very freely off the air with each other. And I kind of worried it'll get filtered, and sometimes it won't be as good for people. Because I tell people all the time, like, if you guys could sit in on these conversations, they're freaking awesome. So we cleaned up the profanity and everything else is amazing. So listen, man, I appreciate your friendship. You are one of the primary reasons I'm on the air at USA Wrestling. You're the one that pushed me in this direction, literally said, call them, do it. It wouldn't shock me if you even called them for me. Our Martori was one of the all-time gets. Seeing you at Hall of Fame duels was awesome. And you're just one of the guys I know I can always call, whether it's to talk or if I actually need something. So I just want to say on the air how much I appreciate you, man.
Well, thank you, man. I know it's the same for you and with me, and I appreciate that. And we got a lot of vaulted secrets that we've helped each other with, and it's been awesome.
It has been, and we will sign off with that. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll speak to y'all next week.